At the end of part 4, we were telling you that Smokey and Claudette had their first child. As a result, Smokey's side piece, Candy, told Smokey that she was going to leave town because she didn't want to mess up what he, Claudette, and their new baby had as a family. Smokey didn't like it, but she was going to do it anyway. In response, Smokey went to his dad and asked him what advice he had on the situation. Five's advice was, let the girl go. Now that we've given you a microcosm of what happened at the end of episode 4, we'll go ahead and jump in right here at episode 5. Besides having problems losing his side chick, Smokey also started having problems with one of his closest friends. After Candy left, Smokey was determined to be a devoted family man. Besides that, he come to hate all the traveling that came with touring. Smokey was a busy man. He wasn't letting any grass grow under his feet. Aside of all the touring that he was doing, he had also become the vice president of Motown. So at this point in his life, he no longer needed the money he made from touring. He made plenty of money off of his writer's royalties from all the songs that he had already written. And don't forget about his salary as the vice president of Motown. Now for years, Smokey had tried supplementing the other group members' incomes by having them help him to write songs. If they worked on a writing session with him, whether he used their ideas or not, he put their names on the songs. So as a byproduct, Smokey also hoped that this would help them to write songs themselves, which he believed would generate even more hits for the group. This would lessen their need to perform live to make money, which would mean he wouldn't have to tour as much. What he didn't count on is that the group was reluctant to write songs without Smokey. They didn't have the necessary confidence or belief in themselves to think that they could produce a finished product without him being involved. Smokey and Pete Moore had been friends since they were kids. However, after Pete got married, his wife started getting in his ear. She was telling him things like, Smokey making more money than you. Smokey taking more money than he should. It didn't help matters that the group's name had changed from The Miracles to Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. Y'all already know when stuff like this starts happening, the end is near. When you put one dude's name or one person's name at the front and then everybody else is just at the end, everybody's not going to be feeling that. And that was the case here. This change had taken place years earlier. Smokey said that it was Berry Gordy's idea to do that. Having the leader's name out front would boost business. When it initially happened, the other people in the group didn't say anything. Later, though, Smokey found out that they didn't believe him when he said that. Whatever the case was, Pete started doing things behind Smokey's back. Now, Smokey was a man who took loyalty very seriously. And when he found out Pete was doing these things, it shocked him, and frankly, it just pissed him off. While he and Pete had known each other for decades, Pete had only known his wife for a very short time. This made Smokey feel used and unappreciated. After all, he had done a lot of extra stuff for the group. He didn't have to do those things. One example was he always picked out and paid for the group's clothes, and he made sure they were always sharp. When Smokey confronted Pete about what was happening, Pete didn't deny it, but he also didn't want to talk about it. Things like this are what drove Smokey to decide to quit the Miracles in 1969. Despite that, it would still be another 3 years before he actually left the group. Why did that happen? Blame it on Tears of a Clown. 3 years earlier, the Miracles had released the song. However, in 1969, a Motown executive in London decided that the song had hit potential and put it out in the UK. After only 2 weeks, the song had reached the #1 spot. Soon it was a big seller in several European countries. As a result, the song was re-released in America, and it went to the top of the charts there too. Ultimately, it would become the Miracles' biggest selling record ever, with sales of over 3 million copies. This song made the group hotter than ever, and their performance fee reached $25,000, or nearly $197,000 in today's money. Whatever the rest of the group thought Smokey was doing and all this other stuff, that money was too good. They begged Smokey to stay. Come on, Smoke. You got to tour with us for another few years, man. We need time to get ourselves financially straight. Smokey reluctantly agreed. In the midst of this unexpected success, with the Tears of a Clown song and the resulting tour behind it, Claudette had left the group. After she had the baby, the decision was to leave the group and remain home with the baby. Now, having said that, Claudette knew how men acted. She'd been on the road, and occasionally she would want to see Smokey, or he would be gone on tour for an extended amount of time. But if she flew out to see him perform, she never just showed up. She always called first. And even when she did get to the hotel, she'd always call Smokey from the lobby before she came up, letting him know it'd be a few minutes before she came up. Smokey respected her for being smart enough to avoid the possibility of walking in on something she didn't want to see. In the midst of the tour that they were doing, the group had a gig in San Francisco. And if you remember back to something we said in the last story, this is where his side piece Candy moved when she left Detroit. She was a Playboy bunny out in San Francisco, working at the Playboy Club. So of course when he was out there, Smokey couldn't resist the urge to call her. When he talked to her, he found out that she had been going through some things. First of all, she'd had an affair with Huey P. Newton, and some violence was involved, and that made her scared. So she went to hiding for a while until she felt safe. They talked about some things on the phone, and eventually, Candy made her way over to Smokey's hotel room. She didn't go over there to talk about Huey P. Newton, and she wound up staying there for 3 days. During this time with Candy, Smokey was realizing that no matter how deep his love was for his wife, he also loved Candy. Now, at the same time this was going on, back home, Claudette received a phone call from the doctor that had helped her and Smokey have their son. He called Claudette and told her that he wanted to see both her and Smokey. So the two of them went to his office. The doctor wanted to talk to them because he wanted to tell them that he had a new technique for helping them have another baby. This time, though, it was above board. They didn't have to hide it or worry about keeping quiet or anything like that. The doctor went on to explain that this time he'd use a brace to strengthen Claudette's cervix. This would let her have the baby on her own. She wouldn't have to use a surrogate this time. Things proceeded as expected, and in December of 1970, it was time for Claudette to have the baby. On December 15th, she gave birth to a baby girl that they named Tamla Claudette. Tamla after the record label that Barry started, and Claudette, of course, after her mother. After Tamla's birth, Smokey let the Miracles know he was serious about quitting now. Oh, they begged him to give him more time so they could find his replacement. And again, he reluctantly agreed, but he warned them to hurry up. After numerous auditions, the group decided to hire Billy Griffin. Even after that, though, the group still wanted Smokey to keep touring with them to help quote-unquote introduce Griffin to the public. And again, he agreed. This would be his farewell tour with the group. Finally, in the spring of 1972, he'd performed his last show and finally left the group. He wanted to spend time with his family, and he decided to retire from the music business altogether. But Smokey's just like boxers and athletes and other people that retire prematurely and then they decide they want to come back. Smokey's retirement lasted about a month. Barry had been insisting that Smokey move out to LA for months. Gordy himself had already made the move, and he loved it. Barry had also gotten into the movie business. Barry was putting his foot down about Smokey moving to Los Angeles now. He told him, if you want to go on with Motown, you have to move to Los Angeles. You've always been a part of this company, and I've always counted on your input, man. And these days, I need it more than ever. I need you out here now. Smokey finally gave in and made the move from Detroit to Los Angeles. Only 2 months after leaving the Miracles, Smokey decided he wanted to write a song that he'd dedicate to members of the group. The song was called Sweet Harmony, and he started the song with this introduction. This song is dedicated to some people with who I had the pleasure of spending over half the years I've lived till now. When we've come to our fork in the road, and though our feet may travel down different paths, I want them to know how I feel about them, and I wish them well. The song was intended to be cut on 3 discs, one for each of the members of the group, and given to them as a personal memento. Before Smokey gave those to the group, though, he let Suzanne DePass, who was then head of Motown's A&R department, listen to the song. She loved it and urged Smokey to put the song on an album. Smokey told her he was retired. but she reminded him that he was retired from performing, but not from writing and singing. Smokey relented. He included the song on his first solo album titled Smokey in 1973. After that, he released another album. This one was called Pure Smokey. He had settled into a routine at this point, doing his own material, producing, and performing his vice presidential duties. Things were going well. Then he met another woman. While performing as the executive producer of the Miracles' first album without him, he'd taken them to perform on the TV show Soul Train. While he was leaving, one of the Soul Train dancers came up to him. Smokey was instantly blinded by how beautiful she was. She called him Mr. Robinson, and she told him her name was Meta. She also told him that she wanted to start a local fan club for him. We asked him would it be okay if she called him. Smokey was listening, but at the same time he was drawn to her dancer's body, her creamy complexion, and her perky personality. He told her that she can call him in his office and gave her his phone number. Later, when she tried to call Smokey, he made a point of dodging her calls. He was trying to avoid temptation. For a little while it worked. One day, though, he decided to take her call. When he talked to her, he found out that she was 21. At least that's what she said at the time. Then she asked him to have lunch with her. He agreed. When they saw each other, he was more intrigued by her than ever. After this, they started meeting each other often. Then they started a physical relationship with each other. And he found himself falling in love with her. One day, when they were together, Meta started crying. Smokey asked her what was wrong, and she admitted that she had lied to him. Meta wasn't no 21 years old. Meta was 18 years old. And at this time, Smokey was already in his early 30s. He was shocked, but her confession helped to explain some things. For example, she never wanted him to come to her house, and she didn't want him to meet her mama or her family. It also explained why she had to be home early every night. Are you serious? What was Smokey's reaction to her revelation? He wanted to talk to Meta's mama. He knew he wanted Meta in his life, so he felt like he had to speak to her mother. He wanted to explain to her in person how he felt about her daughter. Keep in mind that Smokey is still married at the time. He doesn't seem to remember that, but I feel compelled to remind the listeners right now that that's the case. Her mother knew that Smokey was married, but she was okay with him seeing her daughter. Even after doing this, Smokey was determined to break it off with Meta. After all, he was still in love with Claudette, and he didn't want to hurt her. He even told Marvin Gaye as much when the two men compared notes about their extramarital love affairs. Marvin went first. I met someone who's blowing my mind, Smoke. At the time, Marvin was still married to Anna Gordy Gaye. Now it was Smokey's turn to talk. I got the same problem, Dad. I'm fixing to wipe her from my system, though. He told Marvin that he could do the same thing if he just persevered and if he was mentally disciplined. Marvin wanted to know, was she younger than Claudette? Yeah, Smokey told him, but I'm still in love with Claudette. I'm doing everything to concentrate on my marriage, man. Then Smokey changed the subject and started asking Marvin about his situation with the fine young thing he'd found. Janice, young and gorgeous. There's no resisting, Marvin responded. Those that checked out the video that we did about Marvin and Janice know that Marvin was 19 years older than Janice, and she was only 16 years old at the time of this conversation that we're relating to you now. Smokey was adamant about breaking it off with Meta. I'm absolutely positively forgetting I ever met her, he told Marvin. I'm going to resist. Smokey was lying to Marvin. But most of all, Smokey was lying to Smokey, lying to himself. Not long after this, he told Claudette he wanted to move out. He told her he didn't know if it was going to be permanent or not. He also told her that for months he'd been trying to forget Meta, but hadn't been able to. What did Claudette say? I can't keep you. If you don't want to stay, I got too much pride to beg. Just get out. Just get out before I get mad. Get out now! Smokey moved out for a year. During that time, he kept seeing both Meta and Claudette. Oh man, Meta was super fine and a great companion, but Claudette was a woman of dignity and depth. Truth be told, though, it was his son that convinced Smokey to come back home. One day, Smokey was visiting his children at his old home. At the time, His father, 5, was living with Claudette and the children. Now, how your daddy's still going to be living with your wife, but you done took off? Smokey's son, Barry, told him that he didn't feel safe in the house with Smokey gone. He went on to explain that Daddy 5 was an old man, and that if someone broke in, it would only be the old man and his mom to protect him and his sister. "I want you to come home, Daddy," Barry announced. Oh, that hit Smokey hard. He had to fight tears back. He wasn't doing a good job of it either. Barry had done what most kids do. He thought that he was the reason that his father had left. Barry promised Smokey that he would stop making noise, that he would whisper and tiptoe when he played so as not to bother him, and that way Smokey could sleep and sing, and he wouldn't have to live in a different house to do it. This broke Smokey down. He went into the bathroom and let all the tears flow. After he got himself back together, he went downstairs and asked Claudette could he come back home. What do y'all think Claudette did? Did she tell him to get out again, or did she let him come in? She let him come in. She let him come back home. Don't be fooled, though. Even though his son shamed him into coming back home, that didn't stop Smokey from seeing Meta. She was with him nearly every night when he worked on his Quiet Storm album. He even said she was the quiet storm he felt blowing through his life. However, Meta, just like Candy before her, knew Smokey wasn't going to leave Claudette for her. She was willing to live with those terms, so they kept on seeing each other. However, there was one thing that happened that turned Smokey's love triangle into a love square. He found out that Meta had a side piece of her own, as Smokey found out that she'd begun dating a young actor. Smokey was hurt. Sorry, Smokey was hurt. It's just funny to think of somebody that does all the things that he's done, and then it gets done to him and he's hurt. Yeah, Smokey was hurt. Let me get back in. Smokey was hurt. Always knew that something like this could happen, since he wasn't willing to leave Claudette. That still didn't mean it didn't hurt, though. The pain was real. What really hurt is that Meta didn't tell him. He had to find out on his own. He approached her about this. "You could have told me," he said. Meta had given Smokey a nickname, Green Eyes. In this situation, she abbreviated and called him GE. "But GE, you found out anyway." Smokey went on to tell her he would rather have heard it from her. Her response used words that were very familiar to Smokey. "I didn't want to hurt you," she told him. Those were the very same words that he said to Claudette when he left her for a year. Again, Smokey was broken down by what somebody had told him, and he started crying. Then he told Meta that he wanted what was best for her, and that he wanted her to be happy. Then he broke up with her. But for any soft-hearted people out there, don't feel sorry for Smokey. He still had Candy to fall back on. Remember her? Since the last time we heard from her, she'd moved from San Francisco to Los Angeles. Somehow, Smokey's niece and her husband were temporarily living with Candy. What kind of situation did these people have with it? Smokey came over to visit his niece. How convenient. And just like that, what was once burned out was now rekindled. While it wasn't as hot and heavy as before, Smokey considered whenever they got together a once-in-a-while treat for both of them. Smokey was moved by her loyalty. During the time they were together, Candy refused to see other men. He was still in love with Candy. At the same time, he was permanently growing away from Claudette. While he still thought highly of her, he wasn't necessarily in love with her. Early in their marriage, both Smokey and Claudette had told each other that if either of them ever fell out of love, they should say so. As usual, Smokey would confide in 5. "Feels like I've been married forever," Smokey told him. "I'm feeling fenced in." Here's 5's response. "I've never seen anyone who sweats over the stuff like you. In my day, boy, we did what we wanted," 5 told him. "Man, you were lucky," Smokey thought to himself. We're going to end part 5 right there. Again, we thank you for coming to check us out, for watching us and listening to us. Please continue to like, share, subscribe, comment, and repeat. Check out some of the other videos on our page. Be sure and come back and listen to part 6, We still have more to tell in the story of Smokey Robinson. Thank you, and see you soon.